Thanks, Ludovico, for doing it. So if you are all ready, I think we're just 1 o'clock here in Las Vegas. Good afternoon, everybody online on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I know there is a very large number of participants for today's lecture. There's a great energy, and I want to welcome all the participants, colleagues, and students. We have over 150 people watching online, and my name is Stefan Lehmann, and I'm a professor of architecture based here in Las Vegas. The Global Lecture Series Spring 2021 is a collaboration between the AIA Las Vegas, AIA Nevada, and the UNLV School of Architecture. Thank you to the American Institute of Architects. There are 4 lectures, and these are always on Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific time, free to all participants. Registration is through the AIA Las Vegas chapter website. The lectures are by Snow Hetta, who was our guest in February. You missed it. Zaha Hadid Architects today. Renzo Piano Building Workshop on April 16th in 3 weeks. If you have not yet registered, please do so soon. And Transsolar on April 23rd. I'm both thrilled and humbled that our lecture today is by Zaha Hadid Architects. As most of you will know, Zaha Hadid Architects are an incredible global design firm and powerhouse, which has developed its own in-house design process and architectural language. Before I introduce Zaha Hadid Architects and our speaker, Ludovico Lombardi, associate partner at Zaha Hadid Architects, I want to briefly mention the theme of the lecture series. The series of presentations explore the question of civic space, infrastructure for mobility, and public buildings, and their changing role within cities in the post-pandemic era and the age of climate change, a question that occupies architects and urbanists around the world. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Zaha Hadid Architects and Ludovico Lombardi, associate partner and director. The firm was founded around 1980, over 40 years ago, by the Iraqi-born British architect Zaha Hadid. Zaha studied at the Architectural Association School in London in 1972 to 77 and established her practice in 1980 to create transformative public and cultural projects and radically new spaces. Zaha was also a passionate educator. As a student at the AA school, I of course knew Zaha and could observe her activities as a young teacher at the AA school. First, she assisted Rem Koolhaas and Elias Sengelis in their studio, and then she taught her own design unit. The early years can be described as a struggle to find clients, and it took numerous design competitions and over 10 years to finally build her first building. But what a building it was. The elegant fire station for furniture maker Vitra, completed in 1994. This period was not a waste of time. It allowed Zaha to carefully develop the evolution of her design strategies and conceptual ideas. Since then, the firm has been able to design and build an impressive series of amazing architecture on a global stage, attracting a large group of followers. Zaha Hadid Architect is an international architecture, urban design, and interior design office based in East London with a global reputation of unique design solutions at a multiplicity of scales. An international design powerhouse that works at all scales and in all sectors, ranging from master planning and infrastructure projects to interior architecture and even furniture design. The office has designed over 950 projects and is currently employing over 400 people from 55 different countries. Dame Zaha Hadid was recognized as a major figure in architecture of the late 20s and early 21st centuries, as a winner of the Pritzker Architecture Prize in 2004, as the first woman to receive this important award, the Sterling Prize in 2010, and again in 2011, and the RIBA Gold Medal in 2016. Unfortunately, she passed away on 31st of March 2016, almost exactly 5 years ago today, aged 65. So 5 years ago. However, the practice continues its operations worldwide, and I'm sure Ludovico will tell us more about the unique structure and operational model of the firm and the challenge of operating at such a global level. An incredible innovative team continues to honor Zaha Hadid's legacy in delivering outstanding projects. Each of their projects is different, unique, as we will see today, and their design is to a large extent based on thoughtful design research. Research-informed design. One of the great inventions of Zaha Hadid, of course, was the concept of the continuous surface, a smooth, seamless, continuous flush building surface enabled through new possibilities of digital fabrication and the use of parametric coding. Just think of the cultural center in Baku from 2008. This new dynamic aesthetic was influenced by the earlier work, I think, of architects such as Antonio Gaudi, Felix Candela, Frei Otto, and Oskar Niemeyer. With each one of these projects, there is an enormous effort to combine research investigations with the selection of construction techniques and materials used, and there is always a conceptual attitude pushing the limits of materials. Ludovico Lombardi is an associate partner and director in charge of projects in the Nordic region of Europe. He himself is Italian, coming from the southern region, working in the northern region. He joined Zaha Hadid in 2008 after studying at the Architectural Association School in London and at Politecnico Milan and the Bartlett School in London. He will first give an overview, an overall introduction of the office works philosophy, and then present for the first time some very recent projects soon to be built in Scandinavia, including the design for Oslo metro station in Norway, Tallinn railway station, and Innsbruck cable car in Austria, and other transit-oriented mobility projects. Infrastructure design is, of course, of great interest to us as we engage in Las Vegas in a new bus rapid transit system. There is now a US-wide focus on infrastructure and clean energy. In a recent list of countries with the best infrastructure in the world, the US was ranked only at 85th place, 85th in the world. It has become clear that the countries with the most efficient airports and high-speed railway stations, as well as strong investment in research and innovation, will be leading in future. We are honored to have Ludovico with us. He's passionate about the advancement of design of infrastructure projects, such as train stations and airports. And I hope you will enjoy the lecture, which will be for 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of question and answers. All participants are invited to send in their questions via the chat box function. Please join me now in welcoming Zaha Hadid Architects. We are super happy to have you with us. Ludovico, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, and thanks a lot to the organizer as well. I'm really thrilled to have the chance to give this lecture, and of course the introduction was marvelous. So now I'm going to have to find a way to touch upon all the items that you mentioned, because it's very inspiring to see the way you describe the practice as well. So I'll start with the lecture and see if I can touch upon all the different aspects that you mentioned in your introduction. Okay, so of course, I always start the presentations that I'm asked to do or to focus on the figure of Zaha Hadid. I think that of course is the core and still remains the core of the practice. Her ideas, her attitudes, her ambitions, her passions, and her guidance, which is still with us today. And it's an enormous legacy that now we're continuing in the past years in a series of new projects and trying to carry forward the legacy of Zaha Hadid. We are globally active, as you mentioned in your introduction. Our headquarters is in London, but we do have a presence in the US, in Beijing, Hong Kong, and we also have some sort of satellite presence in South America, Scandinavia, and Middle East. We are relatively active around the world. As you can see, there's a broader sort of diagram showing the different regions we are engaged currently. And as you can see, it's quite spread out. Of course, there is a lot of attention to Asia, Middle East, but the historical sort of presence and the historical market has been always Europe. New York and Australia have been somehow new markets for us, even though in the US we had the Pritzker Prize Cincinnati Building Center project as one of the first North American projects we ever completed. In order of typology, the new sort of upcoming typologies we're engaging on is mainly mixed use development, and this is something that has to do with a different sort of approach to urbanism as well, for which now it's very different the way that prior cities were sectorized or urbanized by functions, whether now there is this idea of trying to activate city space and urban spaces with a mixture of use, with a mixture of users as well, and an activation that is 24 hours a day and throughout the year more constant. Beside that, even if it looks relatively small, transport and sports, it is something that has been really growing in our portfolio. We have been really, really happy to finally break through aviations as well, which is a niche sort of expertise that takes a lot of time to gain, and because of the complexity of such projects. But this is something that after the Beijing airport that I'll show later, it's something that we finally managed to engage. And it is now part of our portfolio, but also an important part of our activities. Cultural building and civic buildings, in a way, that's something that, you know, Zaha always has a unique way to do things. And in a way, it's something that normally architecture offices tends to gain expertise on further down their career when they're more established in a way. Whether for Zaha, everything was the other way around. So we started actually with cultural buildings before we even engaged with other type of typologies. But this is again something which is unique to the figure of Hadid as well. I wanted to start with some of the initial sort of works of Zaha Hadid. She was recognized an amazing teacher and an amazing thinker. And by fact, she did a retrospective in museums at MoMA and in New York before she even had the first building completed. And this is something that in a way gives both credit, but also underline the struggle, as you mentioned in your introduction, that it did take years before Zaha Hadid architects managed to complete the first building, which was the Vitra project. But what is important to me to show is when I show these paintings, which were actually drawing boards that Zaha Hadid was submitting for competition or presenting to clients, those were somehow relating to the initial approach or architectural tension that Zaha was pushing for, which was an idea based on trying to deconstruct in a way or articulating the complexity of society and space and behaviors following the influence of Russian constructivism. And of course, those are actually cityscapes. Those are urban representation of projects where you can see for example, the peak in Hong Kong, which is one of the first competitions that Hadid architects won. And this is actually a representation of the city itself, the topography, the landscape, the complexity of the verticality and the mountains that of Kowloon, which is of course where the site resides. And I think that this is very true even in today's production of or design tension that the office has. So there is a sort of evolution from the constructivist approach and the sort of Malevich-inspired representations to what is today a way that we try to articulate complexity through our new visuals, images, or organizational space till the latest projects. So I'm going to show you some of the evolutions of this approach that is the sort of the core, the beginning of the ideas of Zaha Hadid architects and the way we approach design and urban space all the way through the latest projects that we're producing nowadays. I think one of the projects that, of course, I'd like to talk about first is the Maxi Museum in Rome. I know that the topic is ranging somehow in between public, civic, cultural, all the way to transportation, but try to really understand the impact of buildings or interventions and how those affect the urban morphology of a space, and the behavior of people and users. So the Maxi Museum is very interesting in that sense, because it does have two way of interpretation of the same problem. So those are the early sketches of the museum. And this was a competition that we won a few years ago. It was completed in 2010. And the site is a very complex site because it's in Rome. So it's a very historical city, but the context, immediate context, is a context which was defined by ex-military barracks depots. So the whole idea of the project is try to interweave not only at the urban scale, the existing buildings with the city grid and the main axis of Rome, but also on the inside, the way the space is articulated is about the experience of the users. So the movement of users through space. And you can see that this early sketch, in a way, kind of comes across from the volume of the building all the way to the interior's articulation of the space. So that's a context itself. You can see how the rigid line of the existing barracks are interwaved into one another, and then they start shooting towards the main grids of Rome. And in the background, you can see the main sort of landmark of the city. And this is something that it's an urban sort of attempt to reorganize and redefine the space and the orthogonalities of it. But at the same time, when you move inside the building, it's about the way people navigate space. So it's not a museum which is just a container. And of course, you have already examples historically that of this type of approach. But it's a museum that is organized following the movement of the people, or the movement of the user, the way the public can experience space as linear elements, interconnected. And this is defined from the lights, from the louvers in the ceiling, from the way that the space is organized. And there is always this idea of visual connectivity, transparency, which is not a transparency of material, but the transparency of spaces. And I think this is very important because it's going to be a recurrent theme about the way that we engage with public and projects, where the user experience becomes this, and the user movement and the sort of flow of people becomes one of the drivers for the design intent. The same idea, in a way, of recognizing the organization of space through the volumes of the building is also relevant, inverting it in a way. When we put it on the, instead of being a planar organization, becomes a vertical or a sectional organization. So if you look at the Montpellier Project, which is another civic buildings we completed in 2012, this is an archive and a series of spaces for lectures, seminars, and teaching and learning activities. And in a way, this is a variation on the theme, because you can see that the building itself is organized with a series of volumes that, in section instead of plan in this case, are defining the functions behind it. And the legibility of the lines of the volumes from the facade are protruding in the inner space, defining the articulation of the inner functions. So this is again something that, in a way, it's a similar approach to the theme of the Maxi Museum, but is a variation on the same approach. And you mentioned, Stefan, at the beginning, this idea of the continuity of surfaces and making a step back. This is our Rosenthal Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati. So this is the project that's managed to procure us, in a way, the Pritzker Prize. As you mentioned, Hadid was the first woman to win the Pritzker Prize. And this was the pinnacle of that portfolio at that time. And the whole idea of this project is about not only a series of volumes that are intersecting one another, and again, you can read some of the items that have been transferred then to the Maxi, this idea of this very interesting way of having visual connectivity throughout different levels and different spaces. But in this particular case, there was a very interesting and simple gesture that was lifting the ground condition into the vertical, in a way mixing what was a plan and a section organization. And that's why I think is relevant in a way, even if it's not chronological, it's very relevant to see these three projects together. And the same idea is also readable in a smaller scale project. That's the only Scandinavian built and completed projects we have. It's a small extension in Odrupgard, in close to Copenhagen. It was completed in 2005, and you can see that there is also here this idea of negotiating the topography with the articulation of the ground condition of the building itself. So it's a very simple, sort of elegant gesture that lifts the volume and creates this very interesting intersection, which in a way argues for continuity. This project is also, again, if you want, one of the inspiration for what was done in Montpellier, when there is a very clear idea of transparency. So whether in one direction is a very solid building, on the other direction is a completely fully transparent and penetrable space. And the use of light, the way this navigates through the building is very important, especially in the Scandinavian context. You also mentioned the building in Baku, and Baku was in a way a turning point for us. Baku was a very complex project. This is a project that engages with 3 different programs. So there is a function to be an archive, to be a conference center, to be a library, to in a way bring together a multitude of functions. And the brief for this project was actually to have 3 separate buildings. So when we received the brief, we decided to actually tackle it in a different way. We wanted to integrate together these 3 functions and have them organized by 3 different waves. So the 3 waves that you see that define the shape of the building are actually waves that are defining, again, the program of the building, but they're also binding it together. And the same idea about continuity of the ground condition into the building is a sort of morphing between a landscape and a volume. It's something that here has been, of course, the core of the design intent. So this project, in a way, and it's also creating a milestone for us. It represents a milestone for us because not only this idea of this continuous landscape is defining the exteriors of the building, but it's also coming again on the interiors of the building. So you can see the image of the conference room when there is the conference center is basically a series of individual rooms that are defined with the coherent languages to the exterior cladding. And this allows for a very immediate legibility of order as well. What is important about this building is that, in a way, we learned from the struggle to create something that every client loved. That was the beginning of somehow Hadid Architects. Every client, every organization or organizer of competition was in love with the design solution that Zaha was proposing, with the daring attitude and the ambitions of such projects. But they were all very skeptical about the constructability of it. And in a way, this is something that, yeah, we like to think that the technology of the industry kind of catch up with us. But in a way, it's also something that we learned, that we need to really push the boundaries of production techniques, of rationalization, of geometry understanding, in order to make sure that what we design and what we invent, in a way, it's something that can be delivered in time, in budget, but also in different conditions. So this particular project, for example, if you look at it, it's a fairly standard building. It has a concrete core, concrete slab, concrete column grid, and that is a space frame solution, which is what you would do for a warehouse that sustain the roof. And the roof is basically a rain screen. So you can see in some of the details of it that it's a series of curved panels that are then basically mounted onto the space frame. And this is, in a way, is not a new technology, but what is new is the way that we had to somehow preempt the problematic of rationalizing this geometry, and we had to create basically in-house the expertise to be able to engage with contractors and manufacturers, show them how we could optimize the geometry, the shapes, the number of panels, and how this, in the end, it's something that we did from our side in collaboration with different partners. But we had to gain that expertise ourselves. And we learned from the fact that, hearing that something is not buildable was something that we would not accept any longer. So I think this type of expertise is something that also distinguishes the Hadid Architects' approach towards not only design in general, but also design to construction and production processes. And this topic will come back later at a different scale, but I think it's one of the topic I would like to also further present. So I'll switch now to another topic, but this will come back. So another interesting building, again, talking about civic and public building, and that's a completely different scale. It's the Serpentine Sackler Gallery in London. It's in Hyde Park. So we were engaged by the Sackler Gallery organization to renovate the existing building and to create an extension to it. And then, of course, I heard a lot of times that we're not considered so contextual in our intervention, but I think that in a lot of ways, we always strive to make every project in its own way relating to the context, which is materiality, whether it's form, whether it's programs, whether it's technicality behind it. So even in this one, we actually try to reinterpret the idea of a temporary solution that was going to be permanent. So it's a very simple construction in a way. It's a tensile fabric. It's 2 layers of fabric, one that takes the waterproofing, one that takes the interiors, and the cavity in between is the one that is creating the thermal insulation for the building. The edge of the canopy that you see here, which is basically tensile sitting on 4 columns, is done in GFRP, which is a glass reinforced plastic, and then it's a fairly standard sort of glass facade. You can see inside the columns. There's actually 5 of them, but it's the column itself action as a skylight to bring natural lights inside, but also it's developed to create the tension and create the form and the shape of the ceiling and the roof at the same time. So what we did, for example, in this project, we actually had to coordinate with the contractor and the suppliers for the fabric to make sure that all the seam lines were engineered and designed as part of the project. So again, in a different scale, it's basically very similar to what we did in Baku, when we wanted to control the panelization system, not only to make sure that it was going to be built in budget and time, but also in order to control that every seam lines that was somehow creating an extra layer of definition on the ceiling and on the exterior facade was controlled and designed by us. And the same goes for this one. You can see some of the lines of the fabric in the ceiling. Those were all designed in coordination with our designer. So I think that we try to really strive to always make the extra effort to resolve not only the complexity of the design, but also to make sure that the production of it is optimized as much as possible. Another interesting civic or public project, if you want, is the extension of the Port Authority in Antwerp. This was a competition, and I have to say this is one of the projects that we actually looked at it and we thought of ourselves that maybe we were pushing it too much. But it was surprising because it was actually the client itself, the Port Authority, that fell in love with the design solution and decided to award us the first prize. And this is completed. And this project that seems in a way kind of conflicting with the existing building, I find it to be in a way very contextual. I mean, this project is a project that not only represent or answer the brief. So the brief of the project was to double the square meters of the existing Port Authority building and not to touch in any way facades and roof and let's say the structural and interiors of the existing building. So this old diamond is cantilevered on 2 legs, one that is in the inner courtyard and one that is the one you see here, which takes also some of the vertical circulation. But this building itself is somehow a beacon of that takes the colors of the sea, it takes the color of the sky, reflects them in a very interesting way because of the faceted articulation of the glazing of the facade. But at the same time, it reflects the light, which in a way becomes suddenly contextual when you think that the waterfront is defined by a series of lighthouses, for example. So this is the only building that has a presence on the old port area of Antwerp. It's the only real sort of like landmark. that is present there. The rest is actually operational port areas. So we thought that this was a very strong and interesting statement for the city itself. And also it is part of the historical sort of heritage of Antwerp and the sort of faceting of stone cuttings and jewels that has been part of the heritage of the city. Here you can see some of the details of the courtyard inside, where again you can see the steel legs that are supporting the building, and then you have the sort of concrete vertical support outside of it. And again, when we talk about contextual projects, and again, public and civic projects, I think this is in a way continuing the discussion. And this is a cultural building we designed and completed in 2015 in Italy, in South Tyrol. It's a museum for Messner, which is a mountaineer. And again, the brief was somehow very, very simple, but in a way we tried to push and try to create something that was not really obstructing or adding to the landscape and the topography of it, but was contextually in a way respecting it, but also emphasizing these sort of cones of views to the surrounding in a very detailed and elegant way. And this is again about materials. The old facade is done with GRC, which is a glass reinforced concrete series of panels that have been all studied and rationalized so the joints can be controlled because they become an element of definition of this facade. And they come inside with this continuous sort of idea of topography. So in a way, we try to bring on the interiors of the building, the topographic articulation of the mountain itself. And when we talk about public spaces, I had to put this one in just for a provocation in a way, because this is not a public building, but this is actually engaging with one of the most interesting public intervention in New York, in Manhattan, which is the High Line. So this project was one of the projects that we completed most recently. I think it was 2-3 years ago, and it has been a very good success. But it's been a very big success also because of the proximity to this amazing public avenue, which is the High Line, and it is been somehow it was awarded the most photographed building in New York after the opening. So there is a very interesting idea of relationship between civic and public behaviors in a way, and the way that our intervention can trigger and inform those behaviors, not only as a building itself, not only as a presence, but also as a relational sort of intervention. And in a way, this is, to me, again, fairly contextual. So this is our answer to the New York grid, which is one of the most sort of challenging and constraining setup for a new project. But we try to still keep some of the dynamism and sort of articulation of our language, even within the New York grid limitation. I think that in a way, the next subject that I might touch upon, and I'm going to jump a bit, so I'm going to go back and forth through all of them, but it is about, again, public venue. In this case, it's the Olympic pool in London that we completed for the Olympic. And this is on one of the two buildings that was preserved and from the beginning was planned to be retained after the Olympic Games. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this one is more about this idea of urban sustainability or social sustainability. Because in a way, this building, Olympic Games are something that every city used to fight for, because it was a major boost on investments and chance to redevelop and reconfigure spaces that were somehow not considered resolved. And the same was in London. But at a certain point, the problem is that there is a major investment, there is a major attention for a very small period of time. And if the project is not addressing the issue of social and economical sustainability, it just becomes a lost opportunity. So how did we tackle that in this project? So when we got the brief for this project, we knew from the beginning that there was going to be a legacy mode, because this building was one of the two that was going to be preserved after the Olympic Games. So we wanted to create something that was somehow possible to adapt to a legacy mode that had a scale that was not a frightening Olympic pool scale, but was something that was going to serve the community that was going to populate Stratford in the future. So what we did was actually engineer a system that where the roof itself is basically cantilevering on 2 points. So you can see one of that here, and then there is one opposite on the opposite side of the pool. And by creating a roof that is standing on only 2 points on the central axis, the facade that you see on the 2 sides can be removed and replaced by temporary extra sittings for the Olympic mode. So this is something that, in a way, it's becoming quite an important topic for us, because you can see, of course, during the construction, you could see that there is a problem of scale. There is a problem of answering an immediate call for the Olympic needs, but then there is the need to actually engage and develop and don't waste such an investment, and make sure that this is actually going to serve the future of the site itself. So this is the Olympic mode, where you can see there are 2 temporary wings attached to the shell of the roof. And you can see in this image, it's quite clear. So the one on the left is with the extra sittings, and the facade has been completely removed and offset back. And then the one on the right is the legacy mode, which is now one of the most successful public swimming pool in London. It's a community pool, and it's open to all the schools and all the neighbors and residents. So it's something that if you do have a chance to be in London, I would definitely suggest you to experience. And the diagram is very simple. I mean, the over-catering needed capacity, which is over 17,000 seats, compared to the current capacity, which is much more into scale, it's something that has been a very strong will for our approach from the beginning to take into account. And then when we talk about social and economical sustainability, of course, we also do research on material sustainability. So we just got awarded the planning application, or the building permit actually, for the first ever timber stadium, which is completely engineered in cross-laminated timber. I mean, normally we would have parts of the buildings that would be in timber solutions or timber construction techniques. But this is going to be the first stadium to be built completely engineered in timber construction methods. And this is in the UK. It's for Forest Green Rover, which is a second category team. And the client is an entrepreneur on renewable energy. So in his brief, he had very strong attention to carbon footprint and sustainability record. And as you can see, we really pushed the boundaries, not only of the design, but in a way of the technology that were needed to be able to deliver something in this scale, with this type of design approach, but at the same time with a sustainability target that was requested by the brief. And those are some of the drawings that just show how we, together with engineers, engineered the old construction techniques of the building itself. Another interesting project talking about civic and public building is this project, which again engages with the research on materiality and construction techniques. It's a slightly different area, so there is of course a different approach to that, but it's in Cambodia, and it's a design that we won and produced for the documentation center for the victim of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Hopefully this will proceed ahead in time. This project was about not only creating something that was representing, in a way, the local sensibility of calligraphy or kind of constructions, let's say, but also was trying to bring it to a next level of sustainability by using timber, and at the same time using the different volumes, which is a very simple diagrammatic organization. So every sort of pot or tower that you can see as its own program, but the way they intersect into one another allows for programs to merge, for programs to start blending into one another, but also creates cavities that are used for increasing natural ventilation, which is of course something that in this type of climate is very humid. It's something that it's really important. And then at the same time, the design of the sort of feature at the ground floor are answering for stormwater pools, or like, so we're trying to really use as much as possible natural ventilation, water bodies to really cool down and create the target of quality of spaces and sustainability that we have on our agenda. Another interesting project, that's a competition we did a few years ago. This is in Sweden. It's a competition for another aquatic center, which again I think it's interesting because there was an existing building, which is the existing swimming pool you see on the left, and then the client called for a competition to do a closed sort of university and European sort of challenge, European standards competition pool. So the way we organized this project was trying to reinterpret the existing open air pool, which was done in the 60s, and then try to reinterpret it in a contemporary way. But at the same time, every single ribbon that you see defines one different type of pool and activity. So the central one is the exercising pool. The second one is the diving. The third one is the water polo one. So we try to really have again a diagrammatic approach in a way, the way we organize the functions, but it's also the way that we try to retain the similar idea, for example, that you've seen in Baku, of this idea of continuity and legibility and organization of space through the form. Those are the view from sort of summertime, and I think my favorite is when it gets wintertime. It's always very interesting to see how in particular environment there are really 4 seasons, and the way that these affect also the way that design is perceived and the spaces and the functions are perceived. This is still the Cambodia project, so I guess there was a slide in this slide, but you can see some of the spaces inside. And this is a similar project we did last year. There was again a competition for the Photography Museum in Norway, which is a very small museum, sort of brief. You can see in the background there is the Munch Museum that was recently completed. I think it was designed by Ábalos Herreros. And then on the left side there would be the Opera House that you'll see in the next images. And in this project, we used a similar approach to what we did in Cambodia. So every pot has its own program again. So there is cafe, there is a reception, there is learning room, and all of these are again activated in single pods. But then the moment the pods start coming together, the programs start merging into one another. And I think that's when it gets quite interesting, because you get openings and porosity for people to go through and remain outside, but at the same time, you have higher level where the programs are interacting with one another. And this was somehow, you can see now the Opera House on the back, so you get a bit of context of it. And this is something that, in a way, it's very interesting, because you allows you to organize function in a very diagrammatic way, but at the same time allows you to create moments where these programs are becoming something different. And I brought this project in because I think it's a very successful project, but also because to me, this is a transport project. I mean, this is an office tower for SoA China, which is one of our clients, for which we've done a few projects. But the reason why I call this one a transport project or transport informed project is because the reason why this building is designed that way is because underneath the building, there is a metro line to run through. So when the clients gave us the brief for this site, they wanted to have a certain number of square meters, and they wanted to actually resolve the programs, but they were not really answering how do we resolve the engineering and the structural stability of such a building. So we decided, well, the option were two, basically. Either you would do 2 towers, but they were really close to one another, and that would have been really ideal, or you would do a single tower, and then you would have to have cores on the outside. But that, again, was not really ideal for a typology like an office. So what we did was use the constraint of having this transportation line cutting through the tower and creating 2 towers that are independent on the interior organization. And then we have a single skin around that kind of wrap them together, so that it is still a single tower facade solution, but it's structurally 2 independent tower on the inside. And you can see the way that the atrium is articulated. I mean, those are pictures. So it's quite interesting that you see really that the twist itself is something that we try to push to create what is now the tallest atrium ever built in a single tower. You can see some of the shots from the outside. The other interesting thing is that, again, rationalization, the way we try to build complexity into simplicity. All of the facade is done by flat panels. So there is not a single curved panels into the facade, which is something that, of course, it's a lot of coordination and rationalization processes, but it's something that we really developed as our in-house tool to really make sure that what we design can be built. And then once we introduced the transport project, of course, one of the milestones that we in the recent years, which is now completed, actually, I have to change the slide text. This is open a year and a half ago. I think we had a soft opening and it's now fully operational. This is the new airport of Beijing. It's a 56 million capacity airport, which is, of course, quite major and compared especially to European scales. And the way this building is designed is, again, about user experience. To give you some of the references, for example, the length of each of the single star sort of point is calculated for the maximum distance that a person can walk without having to shuttle. And for example, the way that the design is organized along the skylight is based on the fact that natural light is guiding the user towards the center in a very immediate way. So there is a lot of this attention to the users, even at the scale of such a gigantic infrastructural piece. And then inside, you have the same sort of columns that you've seen in the Sackler Gallery project, just maximized to take the scale of the building, which creates focal points where you have meeting points or sort of gathering areas. So again, the use of natural light is, and the way that people react to natural light is what has been driving the design from the beginning of the concept. So if we move forward towards which type of buildings have influenced sort of the urban context of today's society, I think that in a way, and this is very dear to me as well as a topic, I think that infrastructure pieces, because of the importance of it, but also because of the type of investment that they require, should always strive to not only to be functional, but also to, in a way, to bring an aesthetic value, both at an urban scale, but also at a user experience scale. So this is one of the early bridges that we designed at Hadid Architects. It's been completed, I think, 8 years ago, and it's our interpretation, let's say, of an arch structural solution, and it's quite successful. It's very dynamic in the way it's articulated, and somehow opened the door to a series of other bridges that we have now under design or complete in recent year. And I think that this is still relevant today. I mean, there is no reason why that we cannot use investments done for such big pieces of infrastructure that are affecting the way we move and we navigate space to really create something which is a lot more than that. And this is, for example, a great example for it. This is the Zaragoza Bridge in Spain. We designed it for one of the Water Expo we were invited to, and is a permanent piece. So again, it's a piece that was done for the Zaragoza Expo, but it is now a permanent part of the city. And what is nice about this bridge is that in a very simple way, not only function as a connectivity piece or intervention into the city fabric, but it is a pavilion for events, for exhibition. So somehow it takes back to the idea of the inhabitable bridge that was already present historically in Europe and abroad, but it is something that somehow has been discarded as a typology in a lot of ways in modern bridge typologies. So we wanted to bring that back and create this idea of spaces that are usable not only as a transit space, but also as a destination for, as I said, events, exhibition, And this is something that is still valid nowadays after 10 years from the opening. One of the recent projects that we were awarded 2 years ago is the Oslo metro station. We won 2 projects in Oslo, 2 of the 6 stations, which are now the new expansion for Oslo city metro lines. And the station itself somehow is a very simple brief, but also is quite a tricky one. It's a very simple brief because you have 3 components. You have 2 entry points normally, which is entry and exit point, and then you have a sort of platform, which is the apex of the experience, because that's the only place where you don't really transit. That's the place when you also stop and you wait for the train, and that's basically when you start looking up and finally experiencing the space. So we wanted to create completely 3 different type of experiences. So the first entrance, what we call an urban entrance, is an entrance which refers to the carved rocks of some of the formations of the coast of Norway. The platform is inspired by the vaulted sort of glacier ceilings. And then the second exit or entrance point is inspired by the crevasses that are typical of the fjords of Norway. And this is creating a sort of a landscape formation. So our proposal, was really well received, actually. That's why we got not only 1 station, but we got 2 of them. And they're very different type of design. But the same idea is that there is a very different identity between transit spaces and entry and waiting or waiting spaces, let's say. So in this case, that's the sort of carved rock, which is the urban square. This is the landscape square. When you start articulating on different levels, try to really merge together traffic that is going through the station, through the sort of lower plaza and the higher bridge connection. And then underneath, there is the definition of what we call the glacier sort of ceiling. When you start becoming this idea of scoops and intersecting geometries, which are carved out to create a very simple, clean, but at the same time defined ceiling. And again, as per all the other projects, we do spend a lot of time to really try to make sure that what is designed can be controlled, can be defined, and can be optimized, even at competition stages. Another interesting project is the joint terminal in Tallinn for Rail Baltic. So Rail Baltic is a beautiful idea. Rail Baltic is actually one of the reality that is now pushing for high-speed train connection from Tallinn all the way to Central Europe, which is really going to change the way that people not only connect internationally, because of course it's going to really affect the competition to flights on certain type of distances. It's going to affect the goods transportation, so connectivity at the economical level, but also in the way people really can travel from the Baltic regions to Vienna and the sort of central area of Europe. So this project is a series of stations, and we are now designing the first one, which is the Tallinn station. That is the one you see on the screen. And there is a series of other stations all the way through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then connects back to Central Europe lines. And what is interesting is that, once again, this type of investment are not only triggering a new series of international relationships between different countries, between different economies, but also at a very local level, it's a very good chance to create something that allows for redevelopment of the immediate context, but also of the relationship between the part of the city that is defined by the infrastructures and the historical city center, for example. So in our case, again, as you've seen also in the Maxi, for example, the use of natural light, the use to navigate within the station, the idea to really celebrate the infrastructure, like the tracks, the trains going through, the visibility to it, with a very simple linear sort of gesture of the building. And at the same time, this project allows to connect as a bridge, which is open to the public. So you don't have to have a ticket. The whole idea is that this piece of project allows you to connect from the north and south of the tracks without having a ticket at bridge level, but also we use the chance to really connect at below the track level. So you can see there is a hint of the underpassage, which is not a service connection, but it's a very open and celebrative connection between the two sides of the city. And this is very important because we had to anyway re-engineer the old track system, and we had to anyway think about how to resolve the urban context. So this was the perfect moment to use the excuse of an infrastructural intervention to really redefine the city around the project. And if we talk about how do we tackle certain problematics in terms of infrastructural intervention or existing infrastructural areas. In Tallinn, we also won the port master plan redevelopment. So we were competing against a few other practices to try to find a solution to reconnect the city of Tallinn, which is a UNESCO heritage site, which you can see on the bottom left of the image, with the waterfront. And the waterfront has been historically a harbor that has been growing, became a military harbor, then became a goods and harbor, and then in current days is mainly a commercial harbor. But at the moment is a very big concrete slab with no real function apart from serving the commuters and the traffic that comes from the sea. So the city doesn't have really access to that waterfront that back in the days was characterizing the arrival to the city itself. So what we did was starting from find a way to retailor back, to optimize and reduce the functionality areas of the port while still keeping them all functional, and try to gain space for possible future redevelopment of different programs. So activators, university buildings, startups, new offices, and then the last stage is residential. But what is important is that what triggered this is the identification of what we call the sort of a spine or a connection, which is a pedestrian, public, 24 hours accessible connection that you can see on the left side, which allows you to basically not only come from the city to the waterfront, but connect each side of the waterfront without having to interfere with the functionality of the commercial harbor. And the best way to do it is not only to bring people, but to bring, to remove car, of course, but also to start planning a series of activators and attractors that are the ones that are going to start triggering not only the use of the space, but also the commercial viability of it. So those are, again, it's just a master plan vision, but this is actually something that now is becoming reality. So we are supporting the client on the detailed plan process, and we're really looking forward to see how this could bring back the waterfront to the city and the city to the waterfront itself. I think another transportation project that I want to touch upon, and that's going to tie back to this old struggle of trying to emphasize the constructability, but also the way that we control the whole process from design to production and construction, is the railway station system in Innsbruck. So we were commissioned to design 5 different stations in different locations in the city of Innsbruck. So some of them were in the city center, some of them on the waterfront, on the sort of riverfront, and all the way up to the top of the mountains. Now, normally, the way you would address such a project with 5 different conditions would be to make 5 individual projects, each one of them designed to a context, its immediate context. Another way would be to take the same station and just replicate it 5 times, with the risk, of course, not to answer at best each individual context. So what we did was somehow borrowing from, and it's a research that we've done a lot in other projects, and we explore a lot in our office, is how can we learn from some other disciplines. So in this case, it's about organism. It's about creating a genotype, which has a genetic code that defines each station, and at the same time, the phenotype, which is its manifestation in a context, makes them different while still being recognizable as part of the same family. So in a way, it's very simple. I mean, the genotype is a concrete solid base and a glass roof which is inspired again by the formation of the mountains behind, when you have a sort of glacier snowy top and you have a rock solid bottom. But each of the station is answering to its own immediate, not only functions, but also context. So whether it's an underground station, whether it's an above ground station, whether it's the top of the mountain or below. So it's recognizable as 5 stations that belongs to one another, but they're all slightly different to adapt and respond at best at the individual conditions. And you can see some of the interior shots. This is double curved glass. And the reason why I show this type of projects is as well to really show the way we work when we engage with complex geometry. So in this type of project, as you can see, the panelization between each of the elements becomes really the detail of the ornament of the ceiling. If you wouldn't have that, it would be a very, very clean, sort of simple geometry. But the moment you start adding these panels line, these black lines that you see there, those are defining and emphasizing the shape, the form we wanted to design them. And to be very honest with you, the reason why there are so many or so few is dictated by very practical things. So this glass was produced in China, so the amounts of the size of the machine that is used to form the glass defines the maximum dimension. But then the glass needs to be packed and shipped into containers. So the number of containers that you use is going to affect the cost and possibly the time of shipping. So you need to put, these are not only defined by where we as designers would like to see those lines. Those lines are defined by a series of production implications, which goes from the machine itself to the delivery method. And those are all taken on board and sent back to us so that we can recognize the constraints and use them to control the way we want the design to appear. So in a way, this has been designed by constraints or designed by production methods. It's not only designed by us, it's a series of inputs that come together. And that's when I think it's really relevant. So you can see the way it was built and sort of the sort of very simple sort of contouring of the structure. But the glass itself, and in this case, the black marks on it, which is the sealant, the waterproofing basically behind it, because that's a sealed canopy. So that's what is defining and giving the extra layer of detailing to the building. And this is something, if we go on a completely different scale, this is an installation we did in 2009 for the anniversary of Bach. So we were asked to design an interior space for concerts. And what we did was, of course, in very tight time, very low budget. So what we designed is basically a ribbon that you see here. And the way this ribbon is constructed is as this kind of eye-shaped profiles. And because the fabric reacts with a sort of minimal surface behavior, it creates this kind of shell-like effect. So you can see here, you have the sort of hanging steel structures, which is forming the space. And then you have this this kind of sock of fabric that is pulled. And the tension in between each one of them defines this kind of corrugated and shade effect of the fabric. So again, is the engineering part that brings out the detailing of it. And we wanted to really express it, because otherwise it would have been, in a way, too simple to see just a white sort of surface running around, wrapping around the space. We wanted to really emphasize this extra detail of definition by expressing the structural system. And you can see the effect is very visible, every single structural element, and the way that it affects and creates these extra pleats, extra shadows, and extra level of detailing. This is another project that talks about that in a way. It's another interior design space, and it's about investing in material research. I think we have a very strong department that does research in terms of coding, material research, sustainability research. We have, of course, an interior design department as well. And we are really trying to diversify the inputs and the type of expertise that comes into a single project. And this applies to interiors, but it applies to installations, when we try to argue and push the boundaries of technology. When this is like robotic folded metal sheets. And this was done for the Venice Biennale in 2012. And then, of course, we also researched the way that materials can create certain type of effect. This is a table we designed for a limited edition piece, and it's inspired by the way that light ripples through water. So what we did was really simulate the way to recreate that effect by creating a rippled surface underneath. So the base of the table, if you touch it, is actually really having ripples, and it's the different thicknesses and different geometry that are, once they're hit by light, recreate the effect you see on the floor. So it's literally studying the fact that somehow different materials and different elements can recreate certain natural effects. And this is done in acrylic again. So it's something that it's milled out of acrylic. Then the acrylic left over can be reused and recycled. So there is a lot of, again, optimization in terms of what's the best material to do what. And this goes back to some of the early tables we designed. Again, product design, this was about trying to minimize the use of materials. And this is done only in steel, which is done in pieces, of course, and then because it's chrome finished, it can be finished and assembled. And you don't read, let's say, the definitions of it. But it's about taking out volumes from a mass, which is the one that we want to keep and emphasize in the design. So I think that's where I would stop. But of course, if you want me to continue, please let me know. I've quite a few more slides, and I don't know if I went over time, but
I think we are just in time. It's been fantastic. It's such an exciting presentation, very inspiring, and you explained it so well. And we have lots and lots of questions now coming in, of course. And if you're okay, are you still have enough energy to answer?
Yes.
12 questions now. Okay, I start with one from a very prominent architect in New York who seems to be online, who has sent in a question here, and he's asking about the research process in the office. How much time is spent every time on the research for each project? And obviously you're building up more and more knowledge. And how do you frame the research question to ensure it's relevant for others? And who's going to pay for it? Because the client usually doesn't want to pay for that. So anyway, interesting question about research. Can you answer?
Yeah, I think that, we are in a way very lucky because, as you mentioned before, somehow Zaha was always bridging in between academics and professional sort of experiences. So we have been really lucky to kind of maintain that bridge. So most of the stuff that has been in the office for a long time has been engaging with academic, and that's one of the best sort of realm where you can expand on research and also get inspired by research. So in that sense, that type of approach and that type of knowledge, we have brought it into the office. So we have units that are in a way doing research, which are not maybe project related. So those are research that we do. And of course, the cost of it in a way is offset by the projects that we do where we can apply them. Otherwise, it's an investment that we do as an office. Because we need to really, we don't want to lose that type of approach when we are able to do research, whether we do it for a particular, it's initiated by a particular project, or whether it's initiated by interest of some of the staff that are within the office, that's in a way is less relevant because we would do it regardless. So yeah, the cost of it are absorbed by the office, which is now a very powerful machine in a way. But the idea of it, I think, goes back to the sort of academic approach that Zaha used to have. And we have research on, as I said, sustainability, materials behavior. We have research on office planning, for example, or interior space planning. And we are now putting together a master plan, an urban research unit as well. So we are trying to really expand into different areas. And then we try to use that as much as we can in every project. But of course, some of the research is maybe too theoretical, too academic. So we still take the investment of it because I think it's worth it. I mean, that's also, it's something that Zaha would have never let out of the office environment, I would say.
Great answer. Thanks, Ludovico. Now, an obvious question is, what kind of software programs do you use? Can you please list the programs used to model the shapes and to extract the renderings. What programs?
Okay, that's a bit. I mean, I would have to answer that we used almost everything, but that's within the office itself. I think that there was a period where we were really using particular software. Like, for example, when I joined the office, it was very oriented onto Maya, which is mainly an animation actually software. It's not really an architectural software if you want. And that's the one that I started using, for example, when I did my studies at the AIA, and that is one of the best tools still today to do sketch sort of phases. I have to say that now we have a very strong beam oriented group, and that's usually comes in slightly later down the project. So when you start having schematic design to digital design, that's then when we start delivering project completely in beam. So I would say, Revit or similar projects. And of course, the research unit itself, it's some of the people we have in the office are programmers. I mean, they are, I don't even know which software they would use, but I mean, everything that goes from Python, C++, whatever languages, like to grasshoppers and T-spline, Rhino. I mean, there is a variety of it. What is important, I think, is that as long as there is a way to communicate to the rest of the team you're working with, I have never been too demanding on which software has been used to do that. But that depends also by line manager to line manager.
Our students learn Revit,
yeah,
Grasshopper,
yeah,
all the things that you mentioned. Maya seems to have disappeared a little bit. Yeah,
so, I know. I'm a bit old school on that. I have to say.
But old school. I want to put the question to you from Nicolo from Bologna, who we know very well, both.
Yeah.
Asking, Zaha Hadid Architects has a continuous and coherent lexicon that is consistent in all projects at all scales. I was wondering, how do you manage to achieve that consistency with time and among all the many designers and architects that work and collaborate within the studio and come and go? How do different teams dialogue, share ideas, exchange knowledge, and design technological discoveries? How do you do it in an office with 450 architecture or interior designers to keep consistency? It seems a big task.
I think that, yeah, scale of an office does have some implication in terms of control, of if you want quality control as well. And this is something that we have been very attentive from the beginning when we started growing. I think when I joined the office, we were 90 people probably. Now we are over 450. So there's been quite a big increase. And of course, at the beginning, there was really no structure in the office. It was a very sort of self-organized system. I mean, nowadays it doesn't work with 450 architects or let's say people engaging on scales of project that it's so vast. It's very difficult without an organization. So now we are organizing in mainly 3 groups of architects. Then we have which we call clusters. Then we have some units that are specialized, whether it's BIM or design research or coding or sustainability. But let's say we try to, and then there is, I think the people that now have been there for a few years, those are the ones that somehow bear the responsibility to make sure that there is a certain type of coherence, but also a development, that there is not a stagnating sort of like manneristic approach to design. And of course, the directors in the office have been there for 20 years and they've been growing together with Zaha Hadid Architect and Zaha Hadid. So I think that's of course, that's their role as well to keep the legacy, but also the coherence and the next step for the project.
I remember visiting the office in 1987 or 88. There were 5 people and you were in the old school building. London, are you still in the old school building? Are you still there?
That's still our office. I mean, now it's pandemic, so of course I've been closed for I think over a year on and off. But it's still the same building, the Bowling Green Lane School. Yeah, if you remember correctly.
You took over the school now.
All of it.
the entire school. So,
Exactly.
so there is, related to this, there is another question. After Dame Zaha Hadid's passing, how did the office evolve and manage to even grow without her? And how has the design process changed since then? How do you organize that? How have you been so successful?
I think that in a way I mean, we had that responsibility. It was very shocking for everyone, and we had to somehow respond to that tragic event. And I think that we had the responsibility to really try to push and keep, as I said, the legacy and also its sort of development in a way for the up to today's and the next years. Let's say in that sense, there's been a lot of animated discussion, honestly, about how to do that or how we could tackle that. And in a way, of course, the figure of Zaha, it's irreplaceable. But that's not only for us as employees or disciples, or as you want to call it, but also for the world of architecture. So in that sense, it's in a way it can be a wider shared responsibility. How do we keep the legacy of Zaha? And I think that what happened is that in a way architecture is a much more collective endeavor than what it seemed as well when Zaha was there. Because I mean, even when Zaha was present, there is of course the machine itself of architecture is a much more collective endeavor. So I think that is what we kept and we probably made stronger, because of course with missing her, we had to really make do with that. So I think now the office is much more collaborative in that sense, and the responsibility is shared in a wider way.
Okay, I have 2 or 3 more questions, if that's okay.
Please.
One from John. Do you bring in the construction professionals early in the design process?
I think that we actually bring, and I'm very keen on that. We try to bring most of the consultant expertise from the beginning. Like when we do competition, we always try to engage with all the different consultancies from concept, because we of course we want them involved even at competition stage, at concept stage for sure. When it comes to manufacture or production sort of experiences, that's mainly based on the, I would say, the personal experience that we have. So I always try to bring some of the expertise also from the beginning, but then again, we also rely on past experiences when we know already some of the direction we have to go for. I mean, we find ourselves in a situation where we have to go outside of the architectural world. When we design some of the early furniture, we had to go to car manufacturer, or we had to go to like airplane makers, just because no one wanted to actually do certain things. So we had to push the boundaries of what was somehow considered normal, and really try to find a way to create our design into reality. So for me, yes, I would love to bring even like product experience or production experience from the beginning, but I think that's mainly based on each individual line sort of manager for each project. We don't engage them, but we do actually really a schematic design, or that's when we start already asking suppliers, manufacturers for every sorts of inputs that we can do to speed the process and make it buildable, because we got scared of being called unbuildable.
Yeah, you've proven you can do it. So question very quickly answered. The bridge in Abu Dhabi, Al Sayed Bridge, who was the engineer? Was it Arab or?
Yeah, I think it was Arab actually.
Okay,
I can check that.
Could have made a pretty significant contribution to that, I guess.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
And so another question is on sustainability. I've got several questions on sustainability. One is from FN, not sure who is FN. How does the practice include sustainable solutions into the design thinking? Could you please discuss in reference to an exact project and give an example where your project has become sustainable? And you mentioned a couple of examples, sustainable solutions from the design thinking. Those are not just random shapes, they make sense. How do they make sense? And what is you mentioned the sustainability unit in the office. How do you deal with sustainability and a design process that sometimes wants to do something else?
Well, I think that now we have there is a lot of attention in every new competition coming in or every new project. There is actually requirements are becoming more and more stringent. I'm always a bit skeptical about sort of the compliance when it comes down just to ticking a box of a standard, because somehow it becomes fairly simple to tick a LEED or a BREEAM box sometimes. But it is important that that intelligence is brought into the project as from the beginning. It's not only about the fact that you're complying with it, it's that you're using it to really inform the design. So for example, we just completed a competition in Riga for a conversion of an old brewery. And there, basically, because of the constraints of the volume, the main design idea is actually how to articulate the facade according to energy standards, energy efficiency standard. So the main design feature of the old design that we produced is about how to respond to this requirement of efficiency, and how that can be the design itself. So we don't want to kind of apply something on top afterwards to comply. We want to really use that to make an integrated system that is the only design that we're doing, basically. I mean, that's the strength of that project. So we are going into that direction for certain project, for certain other, it's a slightly different take. So for example, on infrastructure projects, sustainability is a very different understanding. But when we talk about building, yes, I think that's very relevant. And we are pushing that boundaries. We're trying to as well.
Excellent. One last question that came in is why doesn't Zaha Architects follow the global office model where you have a satellite in Dubai, one in Berlin, you always have worked from London. London is your only office and your base. It's very different from, let's say, MVRDV or some of the other offices we could mention that have in the meantime 10 offices, 10 branch offices. Yeah. York, big, for instance, biggest opening every week in your office, it seems. So why are you saying we are not doing this? We only work from London and then we work with local partners probably. Something like that.
So what we do is normally we want to work globally, so we need to rely on local partners, and that happens to most of the projects that are not in the UK, and even for some in the UK, to be honest. So it really depends on, and in a way that complement expertise and complement the knowledge needed to be present in that particular region. But to answer your question, I think the main reason is that in a way, everything has been always very focused on Zaha and her figure, but also she was always very keen into concentrate all the design and have control on that. And I think it was, in a way, is part of the success that we have still today. Because instead of having to keep the coherence, to keep the sort of the legacy, it's really needed to maintain a very strong central organization to it. And then, of course, that means that we have to be a lot more mobile, at least the senior staff, because it means you have to be very mobile in your daily life, because you might have to travel quite often. But at the same time, it's something that allows us to really keep our DNA true to itself. So that was a choice that we did, and I think it's that Zaha did as well at the beginning, and I think that's what we are keeping in a way. We're planning to open presences, but not really, but the production itself is mainly concentrated in London.
Yeah, it's probably a good model that suits you well. There is one more question that not just came in from Joseph Branca. He's asking, knowing that competitions can be very costly for an architectural firm, what percentage of projects that you have are from competitions, winning competitions, and which ones are direct commissions?
I think that direct commissions used to be a lot more relevant in our let's say portfolio of work, let's say, especially of course when Zaha was alive. That was a very strong part of our book order. Now, as I said, I think also the way that projects are procured is slightly different. There is a lot more attention on competition as a way to guarantee also quality of work. So we have been noticing that in certain cities or districts or certain countries, is not even allowed to give certain type of direct commissions anymore than maybe before we were used to receive. So I think that definitely nowadays there is returning clients, there is new clients that give us direct commission, but there is a good, I think there is a good 25-30% that are competition projects that we win. And of course, competitions are investments. So that means that whenever you look at the economy of an office, you need to cater for investing into competitions. And even for competition, we tend to prefer invited competition because there is at least a nominal reimbursement and there is a pre-qualification. And those are the type of competition that normally we would target. But if the projects are really good, I mean, I've been doing myself with the office few open competition just because I think it was worth, the brief was worth it. The chance to do something spectacular was worth the risk. So.
No, I think competitions are extremely important for any design-driven office because it's cultivating new ideas, and good ideas in competitions never get lost. Even if you lose the competition, you recycle them and you try to build them at some point, and you push them forward, and they kind of evolve through competitions. It's very interesting how competitions can bind an office also together, you know. So fantastic! Thank you so much. We're getting so many very enthusiastic comments here. This talk was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you from Sarajevo. Oh, amazing presentation, great lecture, and so on. Some people asking to continue, but I'm afraid we are probably out of time. So we have to invite you back. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ludovico. It was fantastic. I hope you have a successful time in Stockholm talking to us tonight. It's already 10 p.m. in Stockholm. I hope you have a successful trip back then to London, and it was fantastic to see you again, and I hope we have you back very soon. Thank you from everybody, from the AIA Nevada, AIA Las Vegas, UNLV School of Architecture, and I hope to see the audience for Renzo Piano Building Workshop in 3 weeks. All the best, take care, and stay well. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.